Walter, look at yourself. You're disrespecting Evelyn's memory." The moment those words were spoken, the world stopped. It truly stopped. My ears rang, as if someone had turned down all the sounds in the room with a switch. I was standing at the coffin, my wife's coffin. I don't remember breathing at that moment. The funeral hall was filled with the heavy scent of flowers, lilies, carnations, and old wood, all mixed together. The air conditioner hummed, but nothing could dispel the cold inside me. Clinging to the edge of Evelyn's coffin, I clutched the small wooden cross in my hand. The cross she had carried in her purse for 35 years. The cross she squeezed when she went into chemotherapy. The cross she brought to her lips when the pain worsened at night. And now, my daughter Brooke was tearing me apart in front of everyone. "Look at yourself," she said, her voice rising. She pointed at me with her fingers. "Look at your shirt. Look at your hair. My mother died just 4 days ago, but you already look like someone who lives on the street." She was right. That morning I'd put on the first clean t-shirt I found in the closet. It was faded. It had been days since I had looked in the mirror. After Evelyn left, the mirrors in the house seemed hostile to me. When I looked at them, I saw my loneliness. But it wasn't about the shirt. I realized that there were familiar faces around me. Hardware store Mike, Susan from church, neighbors we'd greeted for 30 years. Brooke wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at them. She was playing with their eyes. She had set the stage. "Dad, when was the last time you took a shower?" she said. Every corner of the living room heard it. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal? You can't take care of yourself." My daughter Allison moved closer to him. Her voice was calmer, but more dangerous. "We've talked about this, Dad. You need help. Professional help. Professional help." Meaning, you're not in your right mind anymore. I wanted to yell at them. I wanted to tell them I'd been home alone for 4 days. I wanted to tell them how the silence of the house was suffocating me, how I'd collapse on the floor and cry at night while trying to open the closet on Evelyn's side. I wanted to scream that forgetting to shave wasn't dementia, it was grief. But how do you explain it when your own daughters declare you inadequate in front of everyone? "She can't live alone," Brooke said, this time not to me but to the crowd. "She'll leave the stove on. She won't take her pills. What will happen when you're all gone? When she's alone in that big house?" That's when something changed. I realized this wasn't concern. It was a presentation. A case was being made. Brooke turned her gaze to our neighbor Tom, to the pastor, to Evelyn's sister, to each of them, one by one. This wasn't compassion. This was a performance. Allison pulled out her phone. She showed the screen to a few people. "We found a place," she said. "Cedar Hollow, for people who need supervision." Supervision. As if I couldn't even use a pair of scissors on my own. The funeral director tried to intervene. "Ma'am, this is private." "No." Brooke cut him off. Her voice echoed off the wall. "Everyone knew my father. He's not the same anymore. That man is gone. What's left needs professional care. That man is gone." This sentence was spoken beside my wife's coffin. The room fell silent. A sob came from somewhere. People looked away. I watched what they were thinking. Has she really lost her mind? That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the voice inside me whispering, what if they were right? What if I really was falling apart? Brooke and Allison believed this was a necessary intervention, but Evelyn had seen it. After the funeral, as people passed by the coffin, no one looked me in the eye. Something inside me broke. Not just grief, my identity, my very being. 3 months ago, as she struggled to breathe in her bed, Evelyn squeezed my hand. "Walter," she whispered, "don't let them control you all the way to the grave." She had left me something. It wasn't money. It was a trigger, and I had to stay alive long enough to use it. The next morning, Brooke and Allison arrived at my house with a box full of brochures and the kind of smiles people wear when they're about to do something terrible for your own good. "We need to discuss your living situation, Dad," Brooke said, settling herself at my kitchen table like she owned it. "After yesterday, I think everyone understands you need immediate intervention." I poured myself coffee with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since Evelyn was gone. Everything in the kitchen reminded me of her. Her favorite mug still sat by the sink. Her vitamins were still lined up by the window. I couldn't bring myself to move any of it. "This house is way too much for one person," Allison said, looking around with the critical eye of someone planning changes, especially someone in your condition. My condition. Like grief was a disability. "I've been managing this house for 40 years, I said quietly. "With Mom's help," Brooke corrected. "Mom did everything, Dad. The bills, the maintenance schedule, the social calendar. She basically ran your entire life, and now that she's gone, She didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. Without Evelyn managing me, I was helpless. Maybe that was true. Evelyn had handled most of our paperwork, remembered our appointments, kept track of which bills were due when. But I'd built the deck in our backyard with my own hands. I'd rewired our entire electrical system. I'd run a successful plumbing business for 25 years before retiring. We've already spoken to Cedar Hollow, Allison said, pulling out a glossy brochure. They have immediate availability. You could move in as early as this weekend. This weekend, 4 days after Evelyn's funeral. I don't want to live in a facility. Dad, what you want isn't really the issue anymore, Brooke said. And there was something different in her voice now, something harder. What matters is what you need, and you need supervision. She spread papers across my table with the efficiency of someone who'd planned this conversation carefully. Documents with my name on them, yellow tabs marking where signatures were needed. A woman I didn't recognize sat quietly nearby, a notary, her stamp already open on the table, final and inevitable. Power of attorney, medical directive, financial authorization, Brooke explained. I'll handle all your affairs from now on. The house will need to be sold, of course. Sold? The word came out sharper than I intended. Dad, you can't maintain this place, and the money from the sale will pay for your care for years. It's a win-win. A win-win for whom, I wondered. Cedar Hollow probably cost $5,000 a month. The house was worth at least $400,000. That was a lot of care money under Brooke's control. I need time to think about this, I said. There's no time, Allison replied quickly. You've already proven you can't take care of yourself. Yesterday was embarrassing for everyone. We can't let. You continued deteriorating. Brooke pulled a pen from her purse and set it beside the papers. This is what Mom would want. She worried about you constantly. She knew you'd need help if something happened to her. Evelyn had worried about me. I'd seen it during her final weeks. The way she'd ask if I was remembering to eat, if I was taking my blood pressure pills. But Evelyn had also been proud of my independence. She'd bragged to her friends about how I'd taught myself to use a computer, how I'd learned to cook when she was too sick to make dinner. Would she really want me to sign my entire life away after 4 days of grief? She made me promise to take care of you, Brooke added, but something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. There was eagerness there, underneath the concern. So that's what I'm doing. I stared at the documents that would give my daughters complete control over my money, my property, my medical decisions, my entire future. Once I signed these, there would be no going back. Brooke would own my life, and people who get that kind of power rarely volunteer to give it up. But what choice did I have? If I was really as incompetent as they claimed, maybe I did need someone to make decisions for me. The lawyer's waiting for these papers, Allison said, checking her watch. We need your signature today. Today, before I could think too hard about what I was signing away. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. I thought about Evelyn, about the life we'd built together, about the independence I'd cherished for 73 years, all of it about to disappear with my signature. Where do I sign? I asked quietly, knowing that this might be the last decision I'd ever make for myself. Brooke smiled for the first time since Evelyn's diagnosis. Right here, Dad. Don't worry about anything. We'll handle everything from now on. As I signed page after page, I told myself this was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But with each signature, I felt doors closing behind me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was signing away more than just paperwork. I was signing away myself. What I didn't know was that Evelyn had anticipated this exact scenario, and she'd left something in her will that would change everything. Within a week, Brooke and Allison had dismantled my entire life with surgical precision. The moving truck arrived on Tuesday. Everything Evelyn and I had collected, built, or cherished was reduced to 3 categories: facility, storage, or donation. You won't need most of this at Cedar Hollow, Brooke said, directing workers to pack Evelyn's china into boxes marked for charity. My tools, our wedding photos, 40 years of memories, all donated or stored while I watched helplessly. The house sold in a week. $380,000 for our home of 37 years. After paying off the mortgage, that leaves about $320,000 for your care fund, Brooke announced. Should last quite a while. Should last until I died, she meant. Cedar Hollow looked exactly like the brochures. Clean, modern, and completely institutional. My room contained a bed, dresser, 1 chair, and a television mounted like a security monitor. Isn't this nice? Allison asked. You don't have to worry about anything? That was the problem. I'd gone from Walter the businessman to Walter the resident who couldn't be trusted with decisions. The first night, lying in my narrow bed, I wondered how I'd gone from grieving husband to supervised patient in 7 days. What bothered me most was how easily I'd let it happen. Life at Cedar Hollow followed a rigid schedule designed to eliminate choice. Breakfast, medications, activities, repeat. Brooke visited twice weekly with updates about my finances I was no longer allowed to see. "Everything's being handled properly," she'd say. "I've moved your savings into conservative investments. Can I see the statements? Dad, you signed power of attorney. That's my responsibility now." But something about her tone bothered me. The way she said, "your money," sounded like someone humoring a child. I started watching other residents. Frank, supposedly too confused for independence, had been a bank manager for 40 years. Dorothy, here for safety reasons, had raised 6 children and managed complex household budgets. None of them seemed incompetent. They seemed like people convinced they were incompetent by families who found it convenient. I asked to see my paperwork. "Your daughter handles that." I asked to call my business partner. "Family approval required." I asked about visiting my neighborhood. "Transportation needs authorization." This wasn't assisted living. This was prison. But if I was really incompetent, how was I analyzing this so clearly? How could I see patterns if my mind was failing? Maybe I wasn't as helpless as they'd convinced everyone, including myself. 3 months after Evelyn's funeral, a lawyer called. "Mr. Walter Bennett, this is Richard Stone from Stone, Martinez and Associates. I'm calling about your wife's estate. There's been a request for a formal will reading." "Evelyn's will? I thought my daughters handled all that." "There are provisions that require all beneficiaries present. This Friday at 2 o'clock. Friday afternoon, a car service took me downtown to a law office I remembered from my business days. Richard Stone led me to a conference room where Brooke and Allison waited, looking nervous. "I don't understand why we need this," Brooke said. Richard opened a thick folder. "There are aspects of your mother's will that haven't been discussed, changes that only activate under specific circumstances." "What provisions?" Allison asked. "Evelyn's will includes changes made during her illness. If Walter is manipulated into supervised care, the estate changes hands." The room went silent. 50% to an Alzheimer's Research Foundation, 30% to a legal aid program that protects seniors from abuse, 20% to establish a fund for wrongfully placed seniors. Brooke shot to her feet. "That's impossible." She also left a letter. Richard pulled out an envelope. Richard Stone opened the envelope and unfolded Evelyn's familiar stationery. "My dearest Walter, if you're hearing this, it means you've been placed in supervised care, probably by Brooke and Allison. I love our daughters, but I've watched them their entire lives, and I know their weaknesses. They see problems that need managing everywhere they look, especially in people they think can't resist being managed. You are not helpless. You built a successful business. You maintained our home. You raised 2 daughters who became successful women. The only thing you couldn't do was live without me holding your hand through every decision, not because you were incapable, but because I made it easier for you to let me handle things. I'm writing this because I'm terrified that when I'm gone, our daughters will use your grief against you. They'll convince you that sadness means incompetence. They'll take control of everything we built together and call it love. If you're hearing this letter, my fears were justified, but I've also given you a choice. Fight for yourself, Walter. Fight for your right to make mistakes, to be confused sometimes, to live on your own terms even when it's not perfect. Fight for your right to be treated like the competent adult you've always been. If you choose to stay where you are, then our daughters inherit nothing. Not because I don't love them, but because I won't reward them for treating you like a child. But if you choose to reclaim your independence, then everything comes back to you, and you can live the rest of your life however you decide. The money they've been managing for you, all of it needs to be returned. I made sure of that. Choose freedom, Walter. Choose yourself. I always believed in your strength, even when you forgot you had it." The conference room was dead silent except for the sound of Allison crying. "This is cruel," Brooke whispered. "Mom is punishing us for taking care of Dad." "No," I said, and my voice sounded stronger than it had in months. "She's punishing you for taking control of my life without my permission." I looked at my daughters, really looked at them, for the first time since Evelyn's funeral. "How much of my money have you spent?" "What do you mean?" Brooke asked, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "The house sold for $380,000. Between my savings and retirement accounts, we're talking closer to $600,000 you've been managing for me. How much is left?" The woman with the briefcase spoke for the first time. "I'm Detective Susan Clark with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating reports of elder financial abuse, and we have some questions." Brooke went very still. "According to bank records we have, approximately $420,000 has been transferred from Walter's accounts to accounts controlled by Brooke and Allison over 3 months. That money was for Dad's care," Allison said quickly. "Cedar Hollow costs $4,800 a month," Detective Clark continued. 3 months of care would cost about $14,400. Where did the hundreds of thousands go?" The silence stretched until it became an answer. Richard Stone looked at me. "Walter, what would you like to do?" I thought about Evelyn's letter, about her faith that I could take care of myself even when I'd stopped believing it, about the way she'd looked at me during our last conversation and said, "Don't let them manage you into the grave." "I want to leave that place," I said. "Today." "Dad, you can't," Brooke said frantically. "You don't have anywhere to go. You can't handle living alone." "Then I'll learn. I'll figure it out. What I won't do is stay in prison while you steal everything Evelyn and I worked for 40 years to build." Richard Stone smiled. "Walter, I think your wife would be very proud." 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment making morning coffee like a free man. The apartment was smaller than our old house, but every piece of furniture was there because I chose it. Every decision about my day was mine to make. Brooke and Allison had been arrested for elder financial abuse. Most of my money was recovered, though they'd spent about $60,000 on debt consolidation and lifestyle expenses. They were sentenced, and it wasn't a slap on the wrist. More importantly, they'd been forced to confront what they'd really done. Not protected me, but manipulated me. The hardest part hadn't been getting my money back. It had been realizing how easily I'd given up my independence. I'd hired a weekly housekeeper. I'd joined a senior center. I'd even started dating a widow named Patricia who found my story inspiring. Brooke and Allison wrote from prison, trying to explain how they'd convinced themselves that controlling my life was caring for me. I wrote back briefly, saying I hoped they'd learn the difference between helping someone and helping themselves. Every morning I thought about Evelyn's letter, about her insistence that I was worth fighting for. Sitting at my kitchen table with her wooden cross beside my coffee cup, I could almost hear her voice. "Don't let them manage you into the grave, Walter." Brooke and Allison had called me a disgrace to Evelyn's memory. Evelyn had used her will to call me strong. I knew which voice I was listening to now.